Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming in on a late Wednesday night. We have Kevin Lee and John Burkhart of Extinction Rebellion, an organization, as I mentioned earlier, that I believe got its start in 2018 in the UK and has expanded globally, including the United States. And Extinction Rebellion will be participating and very much involved in this climate strike activity that is starting on Friday and continuing in various parts of the United States through next week. Kevin, John, welcome to Sound and Fury.
Thank you. Thanks for having us over.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
You're very welcome. Why don't one or both of you start by telling us a little bit more about the organization?
Yeah, I can. This is John. Extinction Rebellion, as you said, started last year in the UK and has grown rapidly since that time. They did a couple big demonstrations over there. Big one was in October, where they occupied, I think, 4 bridges in the city of London. They had about 6,000 people show up. And then they did then they called for an international rebellion, and that's when it went international. It started in Boston in January. So it's really been, not very long time that it's been up and running.
And these actions specifically are to what? Make people more aware of a climate crisis, or what exactly? Why did they occupy that bridge, for instance?
Yeah, that's right. Well, part of our methodology is to do direct action or what we call nonviolent civil disobedience, and also to engage directly with the public. So we feel that if you're doing a demonstration or a protest against another entity, that the general public can kind of ignore that. They can kind of walk by and say, well, that's between these activists and this bad company or whatever, and it doesn't have anything to do with me. It doesn't involve me in any way. If we are sort of directly disrupting business as usual or the general public, they can't ignore it. Now, a lot of the times they're not happy with that. They might get pissed off and everything.
You're confronting the general public directly in that way. Right. Mm-hmm.
But they do have to think about it. They have to take it, and you'll hear a lot of people say, this common refrain, well, I agree with what they're saying. I don't really like how they're going about it. But at the same time, that person was forced to sort of confront the issue and think about it and sort of pick a side on the issue, which is what we want them to do.
Mm-hmm. And Kevin?
Yeah, I would say that the sort of impetus behind Extinction Rebellion is that it's been several decades since we've known about this grave climate crisis. We really haven't done anything about it. And Extinction Rebellion, their theory of change is that the threat is approaching us so fast that we have to do something right now, right away, on a drastic scale, on an enormous scale, very, very quickly. And so the only way to achieve that is, there isn't time for sort of incremental moves within sort of the business world or perhaps even the political world. Yeah, the political world is clearly too slow now. And so we look to sort of mass movements in the past which have affected huge change very suddenly, and a lot of these have affected change through nonviolent direct action, mass mobilization of large segments of the population. Extinction Rebellion sort of says if we can get 3.5% of the population to engage on this issue, that is usually enough, looking historically, to affect really big change. Now, 3.5% seems small as a percentage, but that's a huge number of millions of people in the United States and around the world. But there are that many people that care. It's about mobilizing them to take action.
And so it reminds me a little bit of, I don't know if you gentlemen are aware of the theory of the 100th monkey, but there was some research of these monkeys on a I believe, on an island chain in the Pacific. When the 100th monkey learned to take sweet potatoes and dip them in the ocean to make them salty, other monkeys started doing that, and what they found was that through the generations, monkey parents were passing this information down to monkey children, who would learn to take the sweet potatoes and salt them. So if you can get 3.5% people to move on a particular issue, that's your 100th monkey. Now, in the past, I mean, you look back into history at, let's say, the civil rights movement and all the activism around that, and the demonstrations, and Martin Luther King's speech in Washington, and the result of that, some of the most notable changes were changes in the law. We got the Civil Rights Act under President Johnson. It seems for this crisis, there's some just tremendously monumental cultural changes that need to take place. Does that seem it can't be too intimidating to you because you're involved with this movement, but how do you process the enormous things that need to get done?
It is overwhelming when you start to think about what would be required to get us on balance ecologically. I see that, you know, a lot of people focus on CO2, and I see that as really just another resource that we're over consuming. So that I think that the general sort of consumption habits of our culture are way off balance. That we've overshot our carrying capacity of our planet probably a while ago, and yeah, it is really daunting. It is really overwhelming. I was just going to say, I mean, we can't even seem to get an expanded bottle bill in Massachusetts, let alone as some Swedish or Danish researchers were saying, we need to plant 1 trillion trees. I mean, how are we going to get to that point? Right. Yeah, I don't know. You asked a hard question. You know, how do we cope with that? And right now, we're not really focusing on specific solutions. Our line is that there are lots of things that we can be doing. We should be doing all of them. Not necessarily all of them, but we should be doing a lot of them. There's no sort of one fix. You know, I saw the article about planting 1 trillion trees. You know, maybe that's one of the major things that we should be doing is planting a lot of trees. We should also be figuring out a way to cut our CO2 emissions massively. Should probably be figuring out a way to use sustainable agriculture everywhere, you know, things like that. The one sort of political demand that we're making in terms of changing the law is actually a different structure in government, which would require direct citizen participation, and that's something called a citizens' assembly.
Mm-hmm. So say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so it's a way to have direct democracy, where the way I think of it in some ways is like a jury system, where you would have a selection of people who are made up of the same sort of demographic makeup of the general population, so that, you know, different social status, different backgrounds are represented. So it's not like a jury and then it's just purely random. It's meant to be like an actual, like good representation of the general population. And then over a series of meetings, probably over weekends, they would listen to policymakers, they would listen to experts weigh in on different things that could be done, and then they would make binding decisions on what measures to actually take. This has been used in Ireland recently for abortion, in a country where that was a really, really like a real live wire. Like no politician wanted to touch that. And they used this citizens' assembly process. Through that, ended up legalizing abortion, which people thought wasn't likely to happen in that country. And then at the same time, and it was, super controversial, at the same time, people there were generally happy with the result because they felt that they were heard, they were represented in some way.
So I mean, so would you call this a people's assembly? Would this replace, for instance, Congress here in the United States, or would it act as an advisory?
Yeah, I don't think it would replace the current form of government. It would be an additional form of government.
And would you have to shake up the tricameral system that we have with an executive and a judicial and a legislative? I mean, I don't think the current president's going to listen to any assembly of anybody.
No,
unless they pledge their utmost loyalty.
Right. Yeah, that I really probably can't speak on details of the exact mechanism of how it would work in our current structure. But like, let's say there's an issue and we agree we're going to need to deliberate and vote on this issue, that they would have some weight in that decision.
I mean, if we had an assembly of those 95% of all scientists who study the atmosphere and climate who would think humans have something to do with global warming, that assembly should be able to make some strong recommendations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would add to this question of like what exactly do we do, and say that like Extinction Rebellion as an organization is sort of solutions agnostic, and the reason we say this is that the technical solutions to climate change have sort of been around for a very long time, and we know what sort of policy levers we have to be able to do drastic things. The problem is not that we don't know what to do. There are all sorts of solutions out there, economic incentive tools, different kinds of programs, different ways to reform the energy market, different ways to incentivize more dense urbanization, all sorts of things like this. The problem is that we don't have the political will to do this. And so Extinction Rebellion sort of mission is to gather that political will to show that
mobilize people,
right. Yeah. And the sort of technical aspects of the solutions, there are lots of people out there who are advocating for various solutions, and we are not there to say that this particular carbon tax or whatever it is the best way to go.
Mm-hmm. So as part of mobilizing, getting this 3.5% energized, perhaps, your organization is going to be participating starting Friday, the 20th, here in Boston, where starting at 10 a.m. there's activities and then a rally on the Boston City Hall Plaza, speeches, and then a march up to the State House in Boston. What will your folks, your organization, be doing specifically on Friday? And then tell us a little bit more about this activity in the Seaport that I read about for next week.
Yeah, great. So we will be there for one of the activities. One of the things that we do as an organization too, as a movement, is create beautiful artwork, and we want to make our actions and our demonstrations to be very visually intriguing, and music and costumes. And we're going to be there we have these beautiful woodblock prints that we've made, and we're going to be inviting people to come and make prints, either pieces of cloth, or people can bring t-shirts. You can bring an old or used t-shirt and make your own Extinction Rebellion t-shirts. We're very, sort of DIY. We don't want to go and get, printed t-shirts made from ordering them online or something like that. We want people to make them themselves. So that's the main activity in the morning. And we'll also be there with, a table with literature, and, people can sign up to join. Then at the State House action, after the march there, the plan is that we are going to be, so we have a newly formed subgroup called XR Youth, which are young people in the movement. I think the rule is you have to have been born after 1990 to be an XR Youth. So it goes up to 20s age.
About 29, 30.
Yeah, it's like the don't trust anyone under 30. Over 30, right. Yeah. So some XR Youth members, and actually one very young XR Youth member will be sort of co-presenting with the Climate Strike Youth Movement a declaration of emergency to the governor, and asking the state of Massachusetts to declare a climate emergency. And that's XR's first demand, is that the government needs to tell the truth to the American people, needs to acknowledge that, hey, this is a really serious problem, and then needs to convey that to the general public, because people really just aren't that aware of how dire the situation is.
And
so that's the 20th, and then the 27th. You asked about the seaport action.
Yeah, what is it called? Flood the seaport.
Flood the seaport. So,
which, by the way, some areas found them. Atlantic Avenue found itself underwater 2 years ago as a result of a storm, and what's that called when the tide comes up and the water goes over whatever barriers. So what are you doing for that?
Yeah, I mean, the whole Seaport district is really kind of absurd. I hadn't really spent a whole lot of time down there. I went down to visit it, rode my bike through there.
You're not wrong.
And it's like unbelievable that we've built out, I don't know how many new buildings, luxury condos, luxury office space and shopping in an area that's 10 feet above sea level or something like that. And not only that, there are cranes everywhere. So they're still at it. I mean, they're still building like there's no tomorrow. Maybe there is no tomorrow.
If you're a construction worker right now, I mean, life seems to be pretty good.
Oh yeah. No, I have a good friend who's in commercial real estate, and I asked him about this. I said, hey, what are you guys thinking? Because all of this is doomed. It's all going to be underwater. And he said, we're thinking 5-year time horizon. That's it. So
one of the things that I'll let you talk more about this, but one thing that bothers me so much is that all this construction is going on, and if you were to take every one of those buildings and put solar panels, not just on the roofs, but line the vertical the vertical walls of the exterior of the building with solar panels, you could almost completely decentralize our energy distribution system and support those buildings with energy. And Clark Apt, who was a scientist and ran Apt Associates here in Cambridge for many years, he talks about this. And we're just not doing that. I mean, we have LEED and we have this and we have that, but we're not.
Yeah. Well, so that's where the law could come in, right? If you said that, okay, we declare a climate emergency, and now the law is any new building has to be zero impact or negative impact. There's an organization that's pushing for that, and I wish I could remember their name because I just met someone the other night who was working on that. It's really hard work. So anyway, so we're gonna gather near the seaport in Dewey Square at 3:30 p.m.
We remember it well from 2011's Occupy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so at 3:30 p.m. on Friday afternoon on the 27th, we're going to gather there, and then we're going to move to an area in the Seaport district, and we're going to do some disruptive direct action. We are designing this so that people can participate at different comfort levels where they're at for the things where we're actually going to be, maybe blocking some portion of a road. People doing that direct action have been trained in doing that safely. So other people who just show up aren't, basically we won't let them participate in that portion of it. But then people can come and observe what we're doing there, observe the festivities, and are also invited to enter into the area that we're holding, and can do so safely, without risk of getting arrested. I wouldn't say there's zero risk, because there's never zero risk. Anytime you're out and about in the street, you never know what can happen. But are you going to have any legal observers there with you, like the National Lawyers Guild? Oh yeah, we have that. We have legal observers. We have people doing sort of health and safety as well, and then we'll have our own members as guides and marshals and things like that, keeping things in bounds. And then the action itself will be very provocative and beautiful and interesting. We'll have some speeches. We'll have singing. We'll have people in interesting costumes, some other props, and a large group of meditators. There's a large Buddhist group now that's joined Extinction Rebellion, and they are going to be there doing mass meditation. And I believe the plan now is at one moment we're going to hold 11 minutes of silence for the 11 years left until 2030, which is what the UN report said we had left to, take drastic action to cut our emissions. So.
And can you say exactly where this disruption will take place, or are you holding that back?
Yeah, no, I can't.
Just in case.
I can't say exactly now.
All right, but you're starting in Dewey Square.
We're starting in Dewey Square, so everyone's going to gather there at 3:30, and then we'll all move together to the area.
That of course is across from South Station. If folks need a major landmark, I will just remind you both of what happened. I think this was now a year and a half or 2 years ago. A group of activists chained themselves to barrels and stood across Route 93 downtown, and a bunch of people were arrested, and boy, did that make the city council angry, because of they stopped traffic, and I'm so just I don't know if that's what you're planning to do, go out onto the highway over there, Mass Pike or whatever, but I think putting my citizen who's really, really worried about the fate of the planet hat on, I think actions like this should not be limited by what we're afraid of. And if you're afraid of being arrested, I think we've gotten to the point where we can't be afraid of that anymore. And if in Washington 100,000 people surround the White House, because on Monday they're talking about shutting Washington, D.C. down. Right. I just think we have to remember the folks during the Vietnam War, for instance, who did the moratorium and brought industry to a near standstill here in the United States, and commerce almost to a standstill. Right. So I honor what you're doing, given the situation that we're in.
I mean, I'm very new to this kind of work, and it does make me uncomfortable and does make me nervous. But I think, like you said, at some point, what's coming for us 10, 20 years, what's coming for my children, that's much, much worse, so.
Now, of course, and maybe Kevin, you can address this a little bit. What you're doing in effect is you're trying to win over hearts and minds, right? And of course, this action that I described from a couple of years ago, where people in their cars got really pissed off because they couldn't commute. As activists, people have to figure out what's the best strategy, what's the best tactic. And there's guerrilla theater that can be utilized. There's there's civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is almost always going to get somebody upset, but you have to balance that and think about the hearts and minds thing. In terms of people closer to your age, Kevin, and you're closer to their age than I am by a lot. What is the prospect around some of these tactics in terms of winning young people over to making them better understand, maybe asking people to put their smartphones down for an hour, and getting them to understand that their future is really, really at stake?
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. I think in terms of people being pissed off about their commutes, when back in April, when the Extinction Rebellion protesters shut down London, basically, there was a lot of anger around people being like, I just have to get to work and I just have to do my job and whatnot. But at the same time, a lot of the protesters would talk to the people in the cars who got stuck and talk about the prospect of a climate disaster, and many of the people stuck in cars were sort of sympathetic on that end as well, being like, oh, okay, maybe I understand a little bit more about why this kind of disruption is necessary. I'm not sure so much about the relationship between young people and disruptive protests like this. I think that there isn't a time in my memory where there was a sort of like it feels like a profoundly far away history, the history of like the 1960s and the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement, and we don't have the sort of memory of a very drastic world situation that could be attacked or sort of addressed through nonviolent direct action.
Mm-hmm.
I think I certainly don't know how to affect change. I sort of grew up thinking like this is the way the world has to be, and I wonder if that's sort of changing within Generation Z with sort of action from the Sunrise Movement and perhaps from March for Our Lives and sort of these other sort of Generation Z centered groups that are mobilizing people who are
and
just
climate
now
strike and the climate strike kids are unbelievable. You know,
of course, yes.
Yeah.
Kevin, can I ask you what year you were born?
98.
98.
Yeah.
So you're 2021.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So essentially, your entire life has been lived in a period of U.S. history where we've been in constant war.
Oh yes.
Okay, so that's one. I think that's a filter that you need to see some of this through, in that, for a lot of us, even not just for folks your age, but for a lot of us, it's the new normal. It's sort of the new normal. Whereas the folks from the now, I'm a little too young to remember to be part of the demonstration during the 1960s, because I was born in 1959.
Okay.
So Woodstock, I was only 10 years old, but there was a gigantic period of prosperity between World War II and the Vietnam War. Although prosperity didn't reach a lot of people, the mythology of America was that it was very prosperous. In your lifetime, economic inequality and endless war has just been has been the new norm. So I'm not surprised that it's sort of difficult to compare and contrast with folks in your generation. And I do think, because of all the distractions in our lives, all the digital distractions, for instance, it takes some sort of momentous event. For instance, the massacre at the high school in Florida on Valentine's Day last year, and that sparked the movement that young people are trying to bring some sort of sane approach to gun control. The climate, well, things change slowly.
Yeah.
Although we keep saying this is the hottest month on record, this is the next hottest month on record. Now it's the hottest month on record, so it's not as slow as you think it is.
But
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but we were actually talking about this right before we came in, about other issues that have sparked a bunch of outrage and a lot of people to become active and get engaged on things. And these are things that are really sort of more immediate, like the Epstein thing here on campus. Kevin was saying there was, huge amount of people out there, but why aren't they upset about David Koch's funding?
Well, I
know people are upset.
I covered a demo on Friday, this past Friday, and his name did come up.
But on the climate, it's not as an immediate kind of thing, like, oh, this is a crisis right here and right now. Even though it is, it's not in the forefront of people's minds. Like the children being separated from families and put in cages at the border, that sparked a huge demonstration in the city, thousands of people marching through the street in like overnight. It's like, okay, we've had enough of this. We're going out there. I think in some other parts of this country, though, like, people are really getting it. There are parts of the United States over the last year that have been hit really hard from extreme events that were unprecedented. You've seen these, this fire in California, Camp Fire, Paradise, California. XRLA got a huge influx of members from that. You've seen, this flooding in the Midwest. I've read that they are sort of getting it. They're like, okay, wait a minute. We were saying all along that none of this is true, but we've never seen anything like this before. Our businesses, our lives are ruined.
I don't think as a nation, I don't think we feel universally threatened yet.
Yeah.
I thought when Paradise burned down in California, Paradise burned down. I think we should all feel threatened.
Paradise turned into hell.
Right? Paradise was paved over, as Joni Mitchell sang those many years ago. It's very different, of course, when the planes were flown into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, everybody felt threatened. And what did we get? We got the Patriot Act, and we got the Surveillance Society. So, I don't know. I mean, hurricanes come and devastate Miami, Houston, the Carolinas, the Gulf, other states in the Gulf. But people in Boston or Seattle or Des Moines, Iowa, they don't feel the threat, I guess. So something's maybe has to happen before we all feel threatened enough to demand that corporations and the government change their behavior.
I feel the threat. I mean, I definitely feel it viscerally every day now. And part of the turning point for me was a talk that Extinction Rebellion produced. That actually they spent a long time before that big action last October in London. They spent a long time traveling around the country giving this lecture. It's called Heading for Extinction and What to Do About It. And the first part of it is just really, really hard hitting on, hey, look, here are the facts. Here's what the science is saying. This is what's happening. Here's examples of things that are happening now. And here's how it's going to get worse over time. I'll give you one example. Right now, there's an estimate of about 1 million people in the world who are displaced because of some kind of climate disaster, ecological disaster. Either their crops are flooded and they can't grow food, or they've had severe droughts. There's a city in India this summer a major city in India, Chennai, India, ran out of water. The whole city, no more water for the city. So there's 1 million people displaced. Oh, and some estimate of part of the conflict in Syria was from this. It's 1 million people displaced in the world. It's creating all kinds of tension, all kinds of conflict and stress. The UN report, IPCC report, said by 2050, that number will grow from 200 estimates from 200 million to 1 billion. Okay, and it's not like, it's going to be 1 million people until 2049, December 31st, and then the next day it'll be 1 billion. No, it's going to be from here to there, this increased level of more and more people displaced, more and more stress, more and more conflict from here on out, right? And it's going to be, and that's just like one example of the kinds of things. So when I heard that talk, I first watched it on YouTube. This is like the sort of one of the original ones of Gail Bradbrook, the Extinction Rebellion founder. It literally changed my perspective like that. It was like a switch was flipped, and I said, oh my God, we're effed. I have to do whatever I can do. And so the first half of it is that hard-hitting science and facts. And then the second half is what we propose to do about it, why we are turning to nonviolent direct action and this tactic, why this tactic is what we feel is warranted, and sort of making that plea or that case for getting involved. So it's it's used as, we use it as kind of a recruitment mechanism, but I think it's emotional. Like if you sit through that talk, it's an hour long. It's devastating. It's really devastating. I'm actually giving it tomorrow. I'm doing it tomorrow, which I can plug, at the Brighton Public Library. At 6.
You're giving
I'm
the
delivering
talk,
that talk. So we've sort of produced our own version of it for the United States. We've adapted some of it, and the one that I saw on YouTube, it's, I don't know when it was made, a year or two ago, year and a half ago. It's already sort of out of date, because like things are happening so fast.
And say again where this is.
Yeah, so it's at the Brighton Public Library.
Okay.
Which is 40 Academy Hill Road in Brighton, and that's at 6 p.m.
Free and open to the public?
And it's free, yeah.
Great. Yeah. All right. Kevin, did you want to add something else?
Yeah, I would also say that the first time I heard that talk, it felt like I had been inducted into a cult or something. Like I had to check myself and reassure myself, wait, how come I like knew climate change was serious all along, but I didn't know it was like, it is my life at stake, and it is my like potential children who won't have a future, or me who won't have a future. And that was like emotional in a way I hadn't thought before. Previously, I thought climate change was like for people I had never met or something, and just like a technical issue that wasn't for me to care about or something.
It's like a few feet of sea level rise by 2100.
I'm going
to
move to Colorado or something and don't have to deal with it.
Look, if I'm lucky enough to make it to 100, I mean, that's 2059. Okay, you're going to get a lot closer to the year 3000. Can you imagine? I mean, think about that. You're going to be a lot closer to the year 3000 than I'm going to be, and it's just it's mind blowing. But part of this is balancing the anxiety, the emotional anxiety that people have, that often causes them to not be able to accomplish anything. Right. Sometimes you just have a defeatist attitude about it, or I'm too small. What can I do? But your organization is trying to bring people back into the active fold, if you will. So again, Kevin Lee, John Burkhart, thank you so much for joining me on Sound and Fury. Friday, starting at 10 a.m. On the plaza at Boston City Hall, will be the Boston version of Climate Strike. There'll be activities, speeches, music. Always has to be great music at these things. And then a march to the State House up above the Boston Common, where there'll also be some sort of disruptive action that people are keeping secret for now as well. And then the 27th, in the Seaport area, starting in Dewey Square over by South Station, Extinction Rebellion will have a rally, and then some actions there.
It starts at 3:30.
3:30 on Friday the 27th. And then, as you mentioned, tomorrow at the Brighton Public Library at 6, this presentation about the state of affairs of the global climate. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us tonight on Sound and Fury. It's about 6 minutes after the hour of 11.